Hello and welcome to a new episode of That Fertile Feeling, the podcast. My name is Francoise, and today I've prepared an episode for you about your hormonal balance and what that means for your fertility. And I've done a ton of research. I went back to all the books I've read around about hormones, about your cycle, about our periods. So many books I've gathered along the way. And the reason I wanted to record this episode is I was actually, and I'm still going to do that. So I was planning on creating a whole month of episodes on your cycle. So create a dedicated episode for each part of your cycle and how you can really harness the power of that phase of your cycle for your fertility. And then I figured, well, it all starts with our hormones. You need like a basic idea of what our hormones are and what they do before we can zoom into these different phases because the different hormones will play a role in each of these phases. And then I think I got carried away and I started reading this amazing book. Let me quickly look up the title. It's called Balance Your Hormones, Balance Your Life by Dr. Claudia Welsh. I can put it in the show notes, the title. Um, this is a medical doctor who is also trained in Eastern medicine. So she brings the two together, her all of her expertise on hormones and then her expertise on or traditional Eastern medicine and Ayurveda as well. It was mind blowing, except for the chapter on fertility treatments. So I wouldn't recommend this book for you if that's what you're looking for. If you're interested in reading up on hormones more generally, it's a great book, but I didn't like the chapter on fertility treatments at all because she has a bias there. But if you're like me and you need fertility treatment, then that's the way you're going to go, right? If you want a baby. So no use reading up what someone who's more critical of fertility treatment finds or thinks about that. But overall, this book, it was mind blowing. In part because it really showed me why the work that I do works. That's for me, it's always the question because I'm trained as a researcher and now I'm dealing with these more esoteric practices. I do trance meditations, I guide women into their bodies through visualizations, and I see that it works. I see it every time, just when someone leaves a session and they're just floating away because they feel so light and relaxed. So I see it works, and yet I want to understand why and how. So I found some answers to that question in this book, and I will talk about that on this podcast. Um, but let's start with the basics. Why is it so important to understand how our hormones work, especially when it comes to fertility? Um, it made me think of my own experience going to an acupuncturist. So I've been going to an acupuncturist for years, and it's really supported me on my fertility journey as well. I would recommend it. It's a quick and easy fix, I feel. Not quick really, because it usually takes a couple of months for your hormones to become more balanced, but compared to doing nothing, it's quite a quick and easy fix to achieve more hormonal balance. But I also recognize that I keep coming back and my acupuncturist keeps saying the same thing. So to me, it always says that my kidney energy is low. And I always think like, okay, so it's good that you help me replenish that energy in my kidneys, but why is it empty all the time? Why are my kidneys working so hard? What's going on there? So how can I really start addressing those root causes rather than the symptoms? And the same applies to fertility. So definitely go see an acupuncturist if you're dealing with fertility issues to readdress your hormonal balance, or an abdominal therapist because I feel they do similar work in working with your hormones. I just did a couple of episodes about abdominal therapy. You can also find more information on my website, thatfertilefeeling.com/abdominal hyphen for therapy. So there are these things you can do, but it's also really good to understand how these hormones work to see if there's more structural changes that you can incorporate in your lifestyle to really support your system and create that hormonal balance for yourself. Also a lot cheaper usually. Um, Before I dive into all of the material that I've assembled for you, Let me mention that this podcast is for educational purposes only, and I'm not providing any medical advice. I'm not a medical practitioner either. So please, if you have any personal health concerns, do your own research and consult your healthcare providers. I'm giving out some very general information today, and it's like I cannot go into the details of every specific case and condition. So take the information that I provide you with, learn from it and then see what it means for you. So what I want you to know about your hormonal balance is that there's actually something really cool happening in the body, and that's called homeostasis. This is the body's central organizing principle, and it happens on so many different levels. So, what homeostasis means is that your body is constantly scanning the environment and making adjustments accordingly to function properly. So, it's constantly trying to see, okay, what's going around me? What's going on around me? How do I feel? And what do I need to do to make sure that I just work as I'm supposed to? Um, I love that we already see this happening at the level of the individual cells. So even the cells constantly scan the environment. They look at the temperature, at the acidity around them, and then they have these mechanisms that they can activate to respond. So they can insulate themselves when they notice that the temperature around them is a bit cold, or they can dissipate heat if they feel that it's a bit too warm for them to really function optimally. So there's this constant balancing act or this constant scanning and response um, to keep you from staying alive, basically, or to allow you to function as well as is possible. So this happens at the level of the individual cells. It also happens at the level of the body, more generally. This starts in your brain. So there's a part of your brain, a structure that's hidden deep, deep within your brain called the hypothalamus. I've seen it compared to Anna Wintour, editor of Vogue. So this is like central command station. And the goal of the hypothalamus is to really keep your body balanced. So it's constantly scanning the environment, seeing what messages it's getting by the other parts from the other parts of your brain about what's happening around you. And then it has two main tools. It can either activate your endocrine system, so those are your hormones, or it can work with your autonomic nervous system. So that's your heart, your breath, all of the bodily functions that work automatically. And your hormones are messengers. So by sending specific hormones to different parts of your body, your hypothalamus is telling your body what needs to happen. So there's this wow, amazing communication happening in that part of your brain through your hormones. Um, when it comes to fertility, there is a direct axis between your hypothalamus and your ovaries. So the hypothalamus will tell the pituitary gland, that's the hormonal gland in your brain, how it should regulate the hormones for your ovarian and uterine cycles. So when it's time to start a new cycle, your pituitary gland will release a follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone at different points in your cycle. And those send messages to your ovaries to get your follicles to start growing and to then have them release upon ovulation. So that are the signals that come from your brain. And once these follicles start growing, they also start producing sex hormones. So they start producing estrogen that prepares your uterus for conception. And then once the egg has been released upon ovulation, the follicles, they turn into, I forgot what it's called, luteinizing body, I think. Well, the corpus luteal, that's what it's called. Um, and then that corpus luteal releases progesterone that will help you maintain a pregnancy if one is achieved. So there's this balance there. The body is scanning like it's the cycle, seeing where it's at in the cycle, what hormones need to be released. And then what's interesting is that we also see this balancing act happen at the level of the hormones as well. These hormones keep each other in check. So I just mentioned estrogen and progesterone, which are both produced in the follicle, or the follicle in the corpus luteal. Um, Estrogen promotes cell growth. So you want to have like what one thing it does, it really prepares the uterus for a baby. So it will thicken the endometrium, the lining of the uterus, so that it's really nice and plump and a very hospitable environment for that embryo. But because it promotes cell growth, if you have too much estrogen, it can also create things like tumors, because tumors are also like cells that are growing. And this is where progesterone then comes in. Progesterone keeps cell growth in check. So after, your endometrium has really gotten all plump and full, progesterone kicks in. It makes sure that the endometrium doesn't keep growing, but that the body, sort of relaxes into that pregnancy. Um, so there's a really beautiful harmony there going on between these hormones. What's crucial for you to know when you're trying to get pregnant is that your body will always prioritize survival, its own survival, over other bodily functions. So I just mentioned the hypothalamus, that's the part of your brain that's constantly scanning the environment. When it senses that there is a threat, it can again communicate to the pituitary gland, the hormonal gland in your brain, that it needs to prepare to fight or flight. That's what happens, in a stressful situation. So a burst of energy is then created to keep you safe. You become much more alert, like all of your systems are just so open to see what needs to happen. You can imagine, right? If you suddenly see a car coming towards you, how you're on full alert, everything's activated, your heart starts to pump more blood to the big muscle groups so that you can actually run or fight whatever's needed. And because this function is so crucial, it will trump other bodily functions such as procreation. So, even if you're ovulating and your body has to decide where is all of that energy going now, is it going to those um is it going to the ovaries or is it going to survival? It will always prioritize survival. Um, and what happens is that the hypothalamus then prioritizes the production of stress hormones over other hormones, such as your sex hormones. So that creates a temporary imbalance. All of your energy, all of the hormonal production is geared towards survival. So that means that other systems are, yeah, getting left out, really. Um, and this even, again, I find this really fascinating. It even shows at the hormonal level. So one of the stress hormones is called cortisol. If there's not enough, your body can create cortisol from estrogen. So rather than an estrogen going towards your uterus to really prepare it for implantation, for, really creating that thick endometrial layer or lining, the body converts estrogen into cortisol to make sure that it can adequately deal with the stress response at hand. And you can imagine what that does to your fertility. It means you will have a thinner endometrial lining, less hospitable environment for implantation, affecting the entire fertility process. Now, normally, after a period of stress, your body reverts back to normal because, as I mentioned at the start of this episode, that is really the body's central organizing principle. It always wants to move back to a state of normal. But there's the big but, we are living in times of chronic stress. So, what we are seeing is that there's actually these permanent hormonal imbalances in our bodies. And this is something I've also discussed a while back in my episode on the link between stress and fertility. So, ways in which we can see this is disturbed sleep patterns, which are not good for fertility. Um, Digestive issues, again, not good for fertility because it's also very much linked to the optimal functioning of your hormones. What we see is blood flows going down, which again is not good for because hormones travel through your blood also. So you want to have optimal blood flow to have that hormonal system functioning. So because of chronic stress, all of these crucial systems, both for for just living a normal life and also for fertility, are shut down. And this is something that we also see in your cycle, in your period. And that is, I feel, what got me really excited. And that's where the good news is for you. Your cycle and your period can actually provide you with a lot of information about whether your hormones are balanced or not. It's also something we discussed on the episode last week with abdominal therapist Jade Adair. So the first thing that she would always do is ask her patients or her clients about their cycles and their menstruation, because there's so much information there about what's happening with your hormones. So a great place for you to start if you want to see if there is an hormonal, if you're dealing with hormonal imbalances and if there's something that you need to work on, is to see, is my cycle normal? Is my period normal or not? And we don't talk about this generally, right? So what is a normal period? What is a normal cycle? I've looked it all up for you. Um, and of course, there's no, like, there are general rules of thumb, but there's also a lot of variation. So don't get concerned straight away, but just take this all as information that you can use to really see, like, what is my body telling me? And is there something that I need to focus on, rather than thinking like, I'll never have a baby, because it's not so black and white. A normal cycle, there's a great podcast on cycles, on our cycles and our periods on the BBC. It's called 28-ish Days. I'll put it in the show notes as well. But that is actually a great title, because a normal cycle is 28-ish days, but it can last from 24 to 35 days and still be considered normal. Um, I used to be a little bit under that. My cycle used to be 24 days. Now with my abdominal therapy, I've actually managed to extend my cycle to 28 days. So still within normal. Um, but just so you know, between 24 days and 35 days is perfectly normal. And your cycle is really only considered irregular if its length varies from cycle to cycle with more than 8 days. So it's okay if, like, 1 month you're at 24 days, the other month you're at 26 days. It's when you have, like, these really big gaps or really big differences between cycles more than 8 days that it's considered irregular. Then usually ovulation, this again is a big range, but usually ovulation takes place between day 10 and 25. Normally we would talk about day 14. Um, but this can vary, and it's very important that you are aware when you're trying to conceive on your own, but even, when you're in fertility treatment. I remember when we were discussing my protocol, my doctors assumed that I would ovulate on day 14, and they designed the whole protocol around that. But because my cycle is a bit shorter, it's only 24, or it used to be only 24 days, I ovulate on day 10, and I noticed. And I had done previous inseminations there. So they actually knew this as well, because I had to use predictors, ovulation predictor kits, for each insemination. But without looking at my file, they just designed a protocol and took the day 14 as my day of ovulation. Now, if I had just followed their lead, if I hadn't told them what I knew my body to be, what knew to be true in my body, I would have completely missed. I would have taken hormones that entire month to stimulate, follicle growth for nothing, because we would have been way too late. So, yeah, no, understanding your cycle, understanding your body, it's not only crucial if you want to improve your health, but especially when you need to communicate with your doctors as well. So normal ovulation between day 10 and 25, depending on the length of your cycle, of course. And then a normal post-ovulatory phase, so the luteal phase, lasts between 12 and 14 days. A normal period, something we covered on the previous episode as well, lasts between 3 to 7 days. It's usually most heavy on day 2 and 3. There's red blood, no big clots. There's a bit of a discussion going on about what's a normal bleed. Like, what I find in the literature is between 25 and 80 milliliters. So that's between 0.8 and 2.7 ounces. What I read is going through maybe 3 to 4 tampons on a heavy day. But another definition I came across, like, was that a heavy period, or a period, is considered to be especially heavy if it just impedes your functioning. So again, there's also space there to listen to your body and feel like what works for you or what's really an inconvenience. Last couple of things, your period should not be painful, so you shouldn't be needing painkillers, and the same for your PMS. It should be manageable, so it's okay to there's these processes at work, these hormones are at work again. So it's normal to feel a bit more anxious during the 2 week wait. Know that when you're super stressed about are you pregnant or not, it's also at a hormonal level, your body just being more anxious during this time. But PMS should be manageable. So if you're really depressed, then something, and this is actually a condition, premenstrual depression, PMDD, that is also a sign that something is going on. So these are sort of the parameters for having a normal cycle and a normal period. So what does it mean when your cycle or your period is not normal? Um, and this is like I started this episode with my disclaimer, right? That this is an educational podcast and you should always talk to your health provider when you have any concerns. And this is where I feel there's a bit of um, an issue that arises because what I do notice in reality is in Western medicine, when you come to your doctor with any of these concerns, to put it very bluntly, they will either put you on the pill, put you on birth control, or they would take out your uterus. That's how we deal with hormonal imbalances. And things are slowly, slowly starting to shift. I see more attention for endometriosis nowadays, for example. You probably, if you have endometriosis, you may be aware that it can take between 7 and 12 years, depending on the country that you live in, to get your diagnosis. So that is how not seriously we take these complaints from women. Women who are in excruciating pain every month, going to their doctors, and their doctors just saying it's period pain. So if you feel that something's off, go see a professional, a medical professional, and keep searching until you find someone who takes you seriously and wants to look at your hormones seriously. In addition, you can look for more holistic providers, healthcare providers. Um, and what I love about their work is that they look at these hormonal imbalances not from the point of like, what's the single hormone that's missing here? But that they take a much more integral look at your body and that they have these concepts that to help you understand what is needed. Um, and to be able to understand that, I need to talk a little bit about the concepts of yin and yang. And I've mentioned them on the podcast before, and they're not super complicated. I'm sure you're familiar with them. So yin is the quality, they also call it the feminine quality. So it's the energy, the quality of being, of relaxation, of the process of rest. Whereas yang is much more about action, about doing, about the outcome, about movement. So there are these two different sides of a coin. And I love how you already see what balance really means. Balance doesn't mean that you have to rest all the time because then there wouldn't be any action, right? You want to have that action. You want to have nervous system doing things. You want to be able to get up in the morning, but you also want to make sure that it's not depleting you. So you also want that yin energy. You also want the element of rest and nourishment in your life. And our societies don't really value that. I actually created a reel about that yesterday, the different types of rest. And then I realized, also talking to my clients, like the first thing I would usually ask a client is, what do you do for fun? You know, how do you make sure that you do something that nourishes you, that you enjoy every day? And then within our realities of work and, social lives and having to go to the gym, Netflix, there's hardly any time left for real restorative rest and fun. So it's already, I feel, starting to become clear why we are. But these concepts of yin and yang, they also tell us, they give us important pointers as to what you can do to improve your cycle, to improve your period. And they can identify underlying problems. So when it comes to yin, yin is very much related to your sex hormones. So the estrogen, the progesterone. Um, the qualities of yin, I just mentioned a couple, but it's really about nourishment. So it's about, at a like a higher level, it's about making sure it's about having good food, drinking enough water, having emotional comfort. It's like where you feel just really nourished. And that's what these hormones do at a cellular level as well, or at a system, like a bodily systems level as well. They make sure that that uterus is just so comfortable for that embryo to implant in and to stay there also. So these are really the building blocks for growth. Yin is really the building. Everything related to yin is a building block for growth, and it provides stability. So I love that when I came across this idea of the sex hormones as being yin and having them as building blocks for growth. Because I always talk about the importance of having a nourished fertility journey, where it cannot just be about the outcome, but it also really has to. It also is about how you feel in the process. So if you feel nourished, if you take the best care of yourself along the way, that is going to then, at the hormonal level, have an effect on your sex hormones as well. As a consequence, this is something that you will notice in your cycle. If your yin is balanced, you will have a healthy, moderate flow. But if you have scanty flow or absent periods, that usually means, not always, like I said, this is where you want to talk to your provider, your healthcare provider, but it usually means that you are not nourishing yourself well enough. So this means that you might not be eating the right kind of food, that you are exercising too much, or that you're not getting enough rest. So if your period is absent or scanty, you have a scanty flow, it just means that you are using up more energy than that's coming in through your nourishment. And you really want to look at your food, at your exercise, and at how much rest you get. So that's the yin side of the equation. Then there's yang. Yang is the stress hormone. Yang, as I just mentioned, is the masculine, doing, competing, focused on outcomes. Not necessarily a bad thing because yang is also about movement and transformation. So whereas through your nourishment, through the food you eat, the stuff you drink, you create the building blocks for your fertility. Yang then makes sure that these building blocks, these sex hormones, create outcomes. So on a practical level, it regulates blood flow, for example. It would regulate ovulation. It regulates menstruation. These are all like young processes where something happens. When you have too much yang in your system, you're running on empty. And the thing that came to mind for me when I was sort of preparing this episode was Jack Nicholson in The Shining. You know that scene where he just keeps typing and typing, all work and no play, make Jack a silly boy, a dull boy, I can't remember. Totally crazy. That's what happens when your system, when it's all work and no play, you're running on empty and your system just goes crazy. Um, and this is what you will see in your cycle as well. This means that this can lead to an irregular cycle. So if your cycle, is just different every month, it's likely that you're experiencing a lot of stress and that your body is trying to survive. So this would be an indicator that you really need to focus on your stress management and see how you can create more stability in your life so that your body can take away some of its attention to dealing with all of these external circumstances and really start focusing on prioritizing these fertility processes within your body. A final thing, like there's so many things that can happen with your cycle, but a final general point that you may want to look at is whether you're experiencing any pain. So I mentioned you don't want to, if you have to use painkillers during your period, something's wrong. If you have to use painkillers, sorry, during ovulation, something's happening. And usually, again, usually because it will, depend on your individual case, but usually when there's pain, it means that there's stagnation from an Eastern medical point of view. So that means that something is not moving, that something is forming a mass, a blockage that's standing in the way of that movement. And lack of movement, I just mentioned movement. Yang is really about movement. So lack of movement usually indicates that there's something going on with your yang, with stress. Um, and stress, when we're stressed out, what you just think about a situation that's really stressful for you and you notice what happens in your body. You will likely feel that you are holding your breath, that you're clenching your body, and where you clench, that may vary. And so this is where I got really excited when I was reading that book because I realized this is also like one of the things I always do when I start working with women on a fertility journey is I take them into their body, into the womb space, and through a visualization, we just walk around that womb space and see what is going on here, feeling into the different sensations, feeling into how different memories are stored there. And what we always encounter is that there are spots where the energy is not moving, where there's something, an emotion, a memory that's being held. Um, I remember very clearly the other day I was doing a session with a client who actually, when we zoomed in on her left ovary, we were working with a specific memory, um, and that represented itself in her ovary as barbed wire. So the memory was completely blocking the flow in her left ovary, not just by constricting any movement, but even with these spikes, like really, really clawing their way into the ovary. That's the sensation she got. And that's what I love about this yeah, applying these principles of yin and yang. Yang is about movement, so that also applies to the processing of emotions. If we don't process emotions, they remain stuck in our bodies. Our usual response when it comes to difficult emotions is that we just try to ignore them because they're uncomfortable. We don't want to deal with them. But that's the exact reason why they remain stuck in the body. So through these visualizations, when I lead women into their bodies, we can actually start to notice where that yang is not flowing because there's too much, where there's no movement because of these emotions that are just stuck and because they're obstructing the flow of energy, of blood, of, whatever information. Um, so yeah, that's why I love this book, why I loved thinking about hormonal balance and how that relates to these concepts of yin and yang, because it gives you such good information about where to start looking to improve your cycle, to improve your period, and to improve your fertility. And I love that I found that connection also to the methods that I work with. Um, just the idea that hormones are actually the way your mind communicates with your body. So your mind picks up on signals that can be like physical danger that's out there, but it gives a sign through the hypothalamus to your body, um, through hormones that are being produced and that have certain effects on your body. But the mind doesn't know, it cannot communicate whether the danger is, perceived or real. So if you are in like intense emotional distress, your body will respond the same. If your fertility journey is creating that amount of distress for you, your body, it's going to harm your fertility. And I'm not saying that to put more on your plate, but just so you know, it's reversible. There's actually stuff that you can do. You can work with this. Um, and that way you can, like, I don't always like to say that we can be in charge, but this is a way for you to take back control over your fertility journey, take back control over those hormonal processes by really understanding what's going on. Yeah, I also really love yeah, seeing the importance of having these building blocks for your fertility and how it's so important to have that nourished fertility journey, but then also making sure that there's enough movement. Um, that's what acupuncture works on. That's what I work on with abdominal therapy, but also with the bodily visualizations that I just mentioned, right? So what I do in the visualizations is really tune into one of those sort of more emotional blockages and then also transform that. So it's not just that we look at that, we also see like what needs to happen now for this emotion to be processed and to yeah, move, to start moving in your body. So I hope it's a bit of a technical episode, I feel, but I hope it's been useful for you. I hope it gives you a new perspective on your cycle, on your period, and that it will really inspire you to start listening to your body, to its cues, to start working with your body. And most like that would be my, I always ask my guests, right? What's your main piece of advice for anyone who's trying to conceive? For me, it's the importance of listening to your body and taking rest seriously. Like really, really creating space in your life to go within, to start listening to your body and to start unwinding. Because what we are doing, the way we are trying to live our lives today, is just not normal. If you feel that you could use my support with this, with any of this, I am launching a new group program, Healing Fertility. It's my signature group program. And we start on May 5th, Sunday, May 5th. Um, there will be 4 sessions in a group setting on Zoom, last 2 hours each. And there's an additional 8 sessions that I've pre-recorded. So it's a bit of a mix between group sessions and lectures that I will just post online the other Sundays, that you can follow on your own pace, because I recognize that, we have demanding lives and sometimes it can be easier to just find your own time to attend. But I also know that doing this in a group is so important because there's also something that happens in a group setting. It's the recognition, hearing other people's stories. Um, that's so healing. And now that we were talking about yin and yang, I was actually discussing this with someone the other day. It took me a while to figure out what happens in a women's circle, in a group, when you bring all of these women together. What happens is that you automatically activate that yin state of being. Because when you are coming together for 2 hours with the sole purpose of being together and just sharing your story, you, yeah, you shift gears, you shift to a lower gear. You also start creating oxytocin. We're talking about hormones today. So there's this bonding element of recognizing yourself and the other that's really counterbalances those stress hormones. So yeah, the more I read about hormones, the more I can really explain what I do in my work and why it's so effective. Um, so there are those 4 group sessions because I feel it's super important to have that as well. And then in between sessions, I will create a WhatsApp channel for this course. So you can always reach out to me throughout the week if you have any questions or if you have a crisis and you need some support. Mondays to Fridays, I will respond. Um, it's optional to, but you can also get a buddy. So that's one of the other women in the group. I will connect the two of you so you can always connect on WhatsApp and just talk to each other, share about your journeys. It's so healing to have someone who's not a friend, but where you can just that you can just connect with whenever you need to vent or whenever there's something you want to share. Again, from a stress perspective, that's emotional rest. Really having a place where you can just uh, be. What else do I offer? If you sign up before April 26th, you will also get access to my online course, Cyclical Fertility. So I created different lessons for every phase of your cycle with meditations, with yoga, with a yoga class, with exercises, rituals. So for every phase of your cycle, you can really work with those tools to create optimal conditions for your fertility. And because I just trained to become an abdominal therapist, I decided that I will give every participant a free online one-on-one session. So during that session, I will do a medical intake with you, and then I can customize the abdominal therapy protocol for you so that you can really, I will teach you how to do the self massage practice, and I will give you this protocol that you can follow to also not just work with me on that more emotional level, but also support yourself physically throughout the process and really optimize your fertility on all levels. So, if you want to know more about healing fertility, you can find more information on thatfertilefeeling.com/healing dash fertility. And I will also put that in the show notes. So thank you so much for tuning in this week. I love doing this episode. I love doing all the research. And as I said, there will be 4 more episodes, 4 or 5 maybe even coming up the next weeks on working with these different phases of your cycle. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me on Instagram at thatfertilefeeling or email me at francoise@thatfertilefeeling.com. I always love to hear from you and I always get back to you and hope to see you back next week. Bye bye.